not sure. It is 3:30 a.m. for him, so. According to my clock, it is time for us to start this session. So, hello everybody, and welcome to this massively packed Calext session. I will just quickly flick through these slides here. I think everyone in the room has checked in to the system, so that's all good. The note well applies. I'm sure you have all seen this, and if you have not, please read it. I expect everyone will be behaving themselves perfectly. Well, hello, welcome. Just flipping through the share slides here. Meeting tips. We're about halfway through this IETF now, so most of you have probably already seen how to add yourself in. We're pretty happy for people just to pop in and chat. I don't think we'll use the queue unless we have to, but feel free to pop yourself in the queue or just pop yourself straight on audio if you're remote. Good morning, Neil. And here's some links, handy links, but basically go to the data tracker and everything's available from the agenda. I have put together a separate set of slides just because this template was a pain to use with the agenda as sent out, but if there's any agenda bashing, please let us know. Does anybody want to change the order or talk about anything different here?
JS contact will be before JS.
Cool. All right, we're starting with JS contact. And with that, I think, should we just get straight into it?
Yes, let's do that. Hello, everyone. Hope you can hear me. If not, let me know in the chat. Starting with JS contact on the next slide, please. So we already had two RFCs in the work. JS contact 03 is the current version of the JS contact format specification. JS contact vcard 02 is the specification for mapping between JS contact and vcard. And as a new addition, we are also defined vcard extensions for JS contact, which define new vcard properties and parameters that we require for the JS contact vcard mapping. That being said, this last RFC, the extensions RFC, most likely isn't complete yet. So we plan to publish all of these three RFCs together, as really this only makes sense. Next slide, please. That being what are the main changes? For JS contact, we clarified that the ID values that you use in these JSON objects for mapping specific types like addresses and others to short identifiers. These identifiers must be persisted. That's mainly because we want to make patching existing JS contact objects easy, and it's way more easier than if you can rely on these IDs being set as you had stored them on your client or whatever. Secondly, the JS contact specification defines the resources property. The resources property is a property that combines various vcard properties like directory services and such, that all basically are URIs for a specific use case. We combined most of them into a resources property, but we came to realize that for some of these resources we need to specialize. One of them, and this is the latest edition, are online services, so that you can specify the service this URI is for, where the service name should be the canonical name of the service. As I said before, we now define new vcard properties and parameters. As you can see, there is the list of current ones. I think there are a few more. If not, they will get more. And some of them we will share with the exact same semantics between new iCalendar properties and vcard properties. So I would like to now use the time more to talk about the stuff that is currently in discussion. And the next slide starts with that. So for JS Contact, in almost every complex object type, we have a label property. The label property is meant for users to set any human readable text they want to set in there. There's no semantics other than that, so it's not expected that machines parse it and extract values from it. This mainly was motivated by Apple address books using a label service already. Now that we want to standardize this also for vCard, we need to define how. A short history on labels in vCard. So there is already a label parameter defined for the address property in vCard, which is like really meant to be like the label you would put on a package if you want to send that package there. So it contains delivery address. Interestingly, the RFC 6350 defines this parameter, but it is not included in the IANA registry. I think that's just an omission, but if somebody knows better, please let me know. But also, there was already a label property in the vCard 3 RFCs, but which also were used for delivery addresses, but these got obsoleted. So at least we now know that the name label for either a parameter or a property in vCard is loaded, and most likely we will not be able to use this name for the type of thing we want to use with the JS contact label if we map it to vCard. Or as I said before, already on the next slide, there exists a mechanism for that, but it's disputable if this really is what the current JS contact label property defines, and that is Apple address books. So Apple address books, since a long time, use both vCard groupings of properties and the specific XAB label property to assign a label to another item or a couple of items in the vCard. So in this case, we would have an address with the label my label. You can assign that also to, I don't know, to basically any property that the Apple address books allow you to define. Now, having had a look at how Apple implements this in their clients, for example, the Contacts app in macOS, it seems that this label is really meant for very short identifiers, like you would use it if you do not want to, if you want to assign a phone number, anything else than mobile, work, like the predefined values, you use this one. You can see a bit of the history in the link that I provided here, which also discusses a couple of other properties, which I mainly think are covered in vCard 4 already with standard properties. So the topic I would like now to bring up is how to deal with labeling JS contact and mapping it in vCard. I'm also not sure actually that the JS contact label property necessarily is defined as how we want it to be defined. As I said before, it was really motivated by mapping the XAB labels from Apple into our structures. But now it seems that the definitions like kind of got out of sync. The one being like a free text, how long you ever want it to be, label, and Apple seemingly using it only for very short identifiers. So maybe someone who is using the labels can shed more light on their experience with it.
There's not many people in the room who aren't us. Hey.
Okay, so yeah, Hans-Jörg also says he needs to look it up. Yeah, so I think at least we can say here that there is more work required on identifying if the JS contact label property as it currently is defined really is useful. Do people really need to tag an arbitrary node to every object type that we define in the new format? And independently of that, would we want something like what Apple is doing in Apple address books with these XAB labels, would we want to have something similar to map in JS context or not? And if there is no opinion on that in the room today, then we will continue working on this, both Mario and me, and we'll come up with a proposal.
What is your intention, to include them, or?
Well, I think for interoperability, we should understand what the XAB label is really used for, since it's for such a long time already in existing data. We should find a way to map it. The question, I think on the next slide, I even posed the question if we should just use XAB label, because I would assume that since it's defined since 20 years, the majority of clients who do care implement it. So maybe we should just use that one. But that will only be, in my opinion, useful if we have a full understanding of what this property is supposed to do.
So this is Joris speaking. Yeah, so my opinion on this, just to give an opinion, is the label property should at least be as powerful as the Apple XAB label property, but I don't see it, it's not necessarily, it doesn't necessarily need to be more powerful. Yeah, at least if there's like a mapping that we can do between the two, it's fine.
Yeah.
And okay, if we cannot map the full label property of JS contact back to the Mac X property, I would also say it's fine, in my opinion.
Yeah, if we do not, sorry. Yeah.
From the old to the new, there should be a good way to map, but from new to old, it's not necessarily, in my opinion. Yeah, but that's it, what I would say.
Yeah, I mean, the charter currently requires us to define a clear mapping between all context properties we have.
Yeah.
But yeah, there are pros and cons of just reusing the XAB label or introducing a new one. I think with the current definition of the label property in JS context, we should use a new one, because I would very much assume that clients that use the XAB label expect it to be very short and have their user interfaces designed as such. If we come to the conclusion there is really no need for a free text thingy you can tag on everything in JS context, then we should clarify that it's meant for very short identifiers in the JS context, and then I think we should just use XAB label. Let me just get okay. There's no further input on that. Next slide, please. We already brought it up, property groups. So vCard allows to group properties. As you can see on the left, there is a group with identifier group 1. vCard says there is no further meaning to that. It's just like an opaque identifier, and you can group 2 or more properties in vCard with that. We already define in the mapping RFC a way how to preserve them. It's a draft version still, but basically we will just use JSON pointers to define the members of a group. What I'm not sure about is if property groups should be a thing in JS context in the format too. At the moment, as you can see, we're using our special mapping properties, which really are meant only to preserve stuff that exists in a vCard, but we do not map to a JS context. I wouldn't know of a use case where property groups are used, but if somebody here uses them or knows of use cases for them and says they should be a regular feature in JS context, then please let us know now or later. Maybe we go to the next slide, please. Ah, sorry, back again. I thought there was a second slide.
I was just waiting to be called. So this is Hans-Jörg speaking. No particular strong opinion right at the moment, but just a note. I think the only system I'm aware of that's I've ever seen using these kind of group properties is really Apple. So I'm not aware of any other system. I've never seen it before. I might still need to look into if the case for Apple is valid or makes sense. So might make sense because Apple is quite a big usage factor here. But yeah, that just as a short note for the moment. I'll also keep that on my list for rechecking.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, as I said, so I surely want to preserve them in the JS contact data so that we can map that cleanly back again to a vCard. But currently I do not see the need, or do not also hear the need, that something like property groups should be a first-class feature in JS contact. All right, then the next, and if I remember correctly, the last slide for JS contact is stuff that we do not intend to cover in JS contact. We want this to be quite short, but it's never going to be completely empty. So what we will not map to standard properties in JS contact are the PID and client PID properties. These are defined in vCards for synchronization, so of different, so that such that different applications can work on the same vCard kind of simultaneously and can keep track of who added or changed what. I haven't seen this in use anywhere. I also have doubts that this is really this is how synchronization should be done. That being said, we can of course preserve these values if they show up in a vCard, but as for now, we have no intention to provide a similar mechanism in JS contact. Similarly, for the vCard defines a couple of temporal values, timestamp being like a regular UTC timestamp, a date and or time, but also just a date and time. And all of them can have partial values. So you can define a time where you do not know the minutes, or you can have a date where you just know the year. We do not intend to support the date and time types, mainly because there is no property using them. Also in vCard, at least as far as we know. We do support the date and or time type for anniversaries. And here at the current definition, we support partial dates. We do not support time-only birthdays, which I think makes sense, but if somebody disagrees, let me know. What we might change is that at the moment, if I recall correctly, but I might be wrong, I think we do not support time in a birthday. And I think if we do not support it, we should support it because people might know their exact time of birth. I do know, for example, so I think that should also be supported. And as I said, again, all this is just the discussion of what to, where to provide standard properties in JS contact. We can all preserve this from a vCard when we map it to JS contact. All right. Any further input on JS contact? Otherwise, I would continue with JS calendar. No? All right, cool. JS calendar, next slide, please. Again, the same story like with vCard. We have 3 RFCs, the last one being the latest edition, which defines a couple of new iCalendar properties. At the moment, we are, for these extension RFCs, for both vCard and iCalendar, at the end, they will share a couple of definitions. For example, the prop ID parameter that you currently see just defined in the iCalendar JS calendar extensions. We'll also use them for vCard. And similarly, in the vCard extension, I think, in one of them, we have defined already the mapping of properties that are in iCalendar or vCard to JS contact or JS calendar. As long as these definitions are not final, we want to just propose it in one of the RFCs, just not to double our editing work, because we definitely want these mechanisms to be exactly the same for both formats, except where one of the formats, for example, vcard, requires additional definitions, but they should share the same mechanisms where they share the same property types and values. So I encourage you to look at the latest one, the extensions draft, and see if how you think about that. That being said, on the next slide, we will discuss a couple of changes for JS Calendar BIS. We currently identified a number of changes that are mainly improving the design, or we're just clarifying things that were not as clearly defined. And as we came to learn while we were implementing the standard mapping between JS Calendar and iCalendar, so the main points that we want to get into JS Calendar BIS, I've kept for this discussion today, as there is not consensus about them. For all the changes that already made it into the RFC, I've put the link into this presentation, which you can click on if you download the PDF. Yes, now it says clearly what I couldn't remember. In the JS Calendar, iCalendar RFC, we defined a standard mapping for unknown properties. The summary is we are using an extension property mechanism for that, where we use a URI in the URN namespace which allows us to use the already IETF registered namespace for URNs, and we can exactly point to the RFC where we define this mapping, so that the property also kind of self-documents where it is defined. The last one I already talked about. So next slide, please. And that brings up the first point for discussion, which we have seen on the mailing list already. I will just give a short summary, and then I would like to ask Mike and Neil to join the discussion. And hopefully we can sort this out today. So in JS Calendar, we have reply to property. It's a multi-valued property, which allows to define multiple ways to send RSVPs or invites keyed by the identifier of a scheduling method. Currently, the scheduling methods IMIP, web, and other are defined for reply to, where web is basically a link the user is expected to click on to RSVP. And similarly, in participant, oops, there is a S missing, so it's participant sent to. This defines where to send invites to this participant. This does not allow the web method, as we do not expect organizers to manually click on something where they can invite a participant. Next slide, please. Now, the issue that came up during the conversion to iCalendar and from iCalendar to JS Calendar was that, as we said, there is a multi-valued property in JS Calendar using various scheduling methods, but iCalendar really only allows one, which is a calendar address, aka a URI, almost always a mail to URI, but the spec does not require that you can put in the organizer or attendee properties in a calendar resource. De facto scheduling is done over with ITIP over IMIP. So as I said, typically you will see mail to URIs in the organizer attendee, but there can be anything else. Now this brings up the issue that we cannot unambiguously map from the send to property or the reply to properties to the organizer or attendee, respectively. And there are a couple of options how we make this unambiguous that were discussed on the list. Maybe, yeah, so maybe let's also say that we currently do not have ways to define multiple URIs for an attendee or participant. And the Web2 method at the moment has absolutely no mapping at all. So on the next slide, we'll discuss options. The first option is to keep JS Calendar multi-valued and define a heuristic and say, okay, if you have an IMIP, just put that into the attendee, because it's very likely that the scheduling should be done over with ITIP over IMIP. But of course, there is data where there is no mail to URI in the original iCalendar data. So what happens if you add in JS Calendar, in addition to an an existing other scheduling method in IMIP? Should that overrule what's in the iCalendar data, or should you stick to what was in the iCalendar data before? We just don't know, and most likely also the people updating the data will not be even aware of the rules. And if we use a heuristic like this, we need to be aware that for every additional scheduling method defined, we need to update the rule, because we always want to be unambiguous. The alternative would be that we merge the other and IMIP methods. The other method really just came up because we realized in rare cases there are non-mail to URIs in an attendee or organizer, and we can't map it to IMIP, so we introduced other. So the idea really, one of the ideas now would be, okay, we just say it's not other or IMIP, we just say it's IMIP, ITIP, sorry. And then it's absolutely clear, whatever you put into this value will end up, if you schedule over ITIP, will end up in the ITIP message. And the last option that was brought up was to do not use a multi-valued property, but for each scheduling method, define its own property, which still might be URI, might be something more complex. That very much depends on the scheduling method. Speaking of scheduling methods, and this will be my last comment before I hope Neil and Mike can join. At the moment, we have the scheduling methods that we have defined are IMIP and or ITIP, but really it's ITIP over IMIP. The web scheduling method seems rather straightforward to understand. If it means to click on something and let the user do manual action. At the moment, I wouldn't know of any other scheduling method that should go into JS Calendar, so we might not know the requirements, the full requirements for additional scheduling methods. Okay, that's the end of my intro to this topic.
Feel free to just hop in, Neil. Go ahead.
Hello, can I jump in? Oh, I've got echo again. Great. So I've thought about this quite a bit, and I still think the current. I'm gonna have to mute this echo. How do you mute? I think the current version is the best option, although we should be more explicit about what to do with mail to non-mail to ITIP. Now I need to find a way without this echo. I can't possibly.
He's getting an echo.
Try a different device. We'll be back in a sec.
Give him some time. This, I don't know if it's coming from this room or whether it's in his own system that he's getting the echo. This is very interesting. I can't remove him from the queue because he's not online. That's definitely a meet echo bug.
Hi, let me, can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm not getting any echo. I'm coming remotely. Did he disconnect? Oh yeah, he's back again.
Okay, can you hear me here?
Yep.
That's much better. Sorry about that. It was impossible to concentrate with your own words coming back in your ear like 2 seconds later. So I think at the moment there's basically there's 2 types of address we can get in here. It's ITIP address that's mail to, and so we understand I can use with IMIP, one ITIP address that is not, and so can only be used essentially internally with Caldo. Now, other is a poor name for that, and we should probably rename that to something else to make it explicit. We could merge those 2 into a single ITIP thing, but I prefer them separate. I think put on the mailing list. At the moment, you've got servers trying to do this translation on the edges, which doesn't always work, and so sometimes they leak out you don't get the mail to address when you need it because they didn't translate it into an external system, and it would be much cleaner for them if they could have both stored inside it. Now, the thing about having multi-value property in general is essentially it's kind of a namespacing. It's saying all of these are properties are kind of the scheduling properties rather than having them with separate top level names. And the reason that's important is for when you have something like JMAP calendars, you can have the servers add support for a new scheduling thing without the clients having to explicitly know about it. So the JMAP spec can say that you can identify which participant is you by looking for a corresponding kind of key value within the send to and like the identity for that user. So it's saying this user, if you add this user to an event, here are the scheduling methods for it, and you just add that as a single property. So it might have, say, this is mail to neilj@fastmailteam.com and future thing new URI. And the client doesn't have to know anything about how those scheduling methods work. It just gets told by the server those are that object is what you add for the send to. And if it wants to know if an existing event is for that user, it just has to look for if there's a corresponding URI within that object. Otherwise, it wouldn't know which properties it could look at. So you'd have to hard code kind of which protocols you support, and that's going to make it much harder to extend in the future. So I do think the current design is correct. In terms of translating, I would probably go with just a simple, well, from calendar to JS calendar, iCalendar to JS calendar is straightforward. There's a single value. If it's because iCalendar is currently quite limited, it's always got to be an ITIP value. It's either a mail to one or something else, and that's pretty much all we care about. And so it either goes to IMIP or to whatever the other one's called, depending on whether it's a mail to. And then reverse, I take the IMIP one first, and if not, take the other one to go back. And I think that's actually absolutely going to be fine in practice. That's if we want to be able to store the other values in iCalendar, we'll need to define some extra properties to store them. Obviously, existing clients won't support the other properties yet, and that's fine because they can't. That's kind of the point of JS Calendar, was giving us an extension method for the future. So that's a summary of my position on that.
I'm not sure I saw Mike before in the queue. Now he's gone. Mike, do you want to say something, or otherwise I do?
I just don't. I just don't really see what problems he's trying to solve. It doesn't map onto what ITIP does at the moment. I definitely disagree with the idea of referring to it as IMIP anyway, but that's just a naming thing. It's really ITIP we're doing, and it's up to servers or clients to figure out, having identified the attendee, is to figure out how to get it to the attendee. Whether they use IMIP or some other transport method they've got available to them is up to them. And I think the only thing that we've identified as something that needs changing, and this predates JS Calendar, is separating out the organizer from the reply to address. That became a problem with sharing and shared calendars. The organizer really shouldn't be the one you reply to necessarily, but that's something we can easily deal with. We can extend IETF to add a reply to. But that's the only thing I'm seeing. I think we really need to simplify this back down to what we do, and not try to anticipate some scheduling approach that we don't have yet. And I'm not even sure we should try and deal with the web thing. I mean, that's an extension. Again, it'd be nice to standardize the having a way of responding to an invitation through some other mechanism, such as the web, and the current approach of adding HTTP bodies to the message. I mean, it works sort of, but it'd be nice to standardize that, I guess. But I don't think that's something we necessarily have to deal with here. It's something we can add later. I'd just like to see us get IETF working, minimize JS Calendar so it does enough to do that, and not try and anticipate some future scheduling method we don't have. Because it may not be adequate for that. If there's multiple properties to deal with, then it's simply not going to be adequate simply having another reply to address. I think the only thing we need to deal with is identify the recipient, and we're done. That's all we have at the moment.
Just popping myself in the queue with my chair hat off here. I think I definitely see the point in having a single object that all the reply to is inside, so that then you can patch, overwrite whatever happens to be in it with new replacements without needing to keep a full list of all the possible fields in future. So having that one level of indirection still makes a nice, easy extension point here, even if we only define one thing inside it. And I think that might be the way to say we only define one item, and that maps directly to whatever's in our calendar, but we have a future extension point that's quite convenient there.
Yeah, I mean, so with Mike's point about not being sure whether it'll be rich enough, we could say, the values are currently defined to be URIs. We could relax that to say they could be anything. I don't know we necessarily need to do that, but that's an option. That would make it harder. By saying they have to be URIs, I said that the advantage is that a client can check, is there a match between this property and a URI I know about identifies this user, without having to know anything about how the URI works, without how that scheduling method works. So as I said, you're not coupling the ability to add this other method to the client knowing about it.
I would like to clarify. Well, I would like to first state one point, and then I would ask for clarification. So the point I want to make is, given the charter and also all practical purposes, I think it's necessary that scheduling with JS Calendar and iCalendar should be seamless. There should be no source for implementers to mess this up, because this is really the core of the specification. So that's why I'm so much against heuristics. So in whatever we come up with, it needs to be absolutely crystal clear what to do, and it should be simple to implement. What I wanted to ask for clarification is, Neil, what you described before, that the client might not necessarily know the scheduling methods of the people they invite. So that this kind of is the same thing like in iCalendar currently, that the URI both acts as an identifier, like as of the user, but also as a way to reach that user. And wouldn't that speak more of what you were saying to like splitting this? So why would I necessarily define the IMIP method to identify someone and not just identify with the URI who I want to contact, and the server might have the best idea what to put then in the reply to or send to properties?
So identify, can you repeat that last bit, Robert?
So I'm wondering if we are conflating identification of a participant with their scheduling method URIs, which is what iCalendar is doing.
We definitely are, to just, yes, I think to an extent. I'm not sure we can get away from that at the moment.
I think
with backwards compatibility.
That was where I actually started to experience difficulties with seeing how this would work. Is being able to unequivocally identify the attendee we're dealing with, the participant, and that was what I wanted to simplify this to ensure that was the case. It looked to me as going to be too easy for me to get an invitation where I couldn't even identify the participant we're talking about.
Well, I think that's quite well defined, so I don't think that's a problem. Like I think what Robert's saying about could we split that is interesting. I just don't know that there is a way to do that right now. You know, if this is the problem of if I have an event in my calendar, how do I know which one of the participants is me, so to speak? And the way we do it at the moment is one of the, presumably it's added via mail to, one of those mail to send to things on the participant matches an email address that I own. Or possibly if you were using implicit scheduling, you'd know that this URI matches my own.
Yeah, I think that this is something that already was kind of trying to address in the new iCalendar properties, RFC 7986, I think it is, where there's this email parameter, right? This was exactly meant to, like, you can provide the email address of someone who identifies them. I think the description was in an address book, but that's not necessarily the address where you send the IMIP to. And I think this is exactly going in the same direction. If there is the need to separate scheduling from identification, because as you described before, you really would expect the server to better know the various scheduling methods rather the client. And at the moment, it seems not so clear to me if as a client implementer what they would put into the reply to. Are they expected to know all the scheduling methods for the participants?
No, I mean, the recommendation in the JMAP spec is they do not set a reply to. The server sets it when you create it, and the server can put in any methods it knows about. If the client wants to, it can create an explicit one. If it, wants to say for whatever reason reply to this way, and I know this is going to work, but the recommendation is they don't set it. The server says.
Yeah, but it's the same for send to, right? For send to, you need like to say this is going to be
so
my participant.
Sure, but for your send to, again, you get those from the server. The server says, here's the identity, so do you. For each of these identities, this is the send to object. You just put this object in verbatim, and that may have whatever scheduling methods the server knows how it's going to receive. And so in both cases, the client doesn't have to know how those protocols work. The server just says, here's the value to use. All the client needs to know is, I can know that this user is this participant by matching a URI in the send to with one of the URIs in the send to for that identity, for that user.
Yeah, but now it's multiple URIs, right? So
yeah, that's just loop through.
Yeah, so at the moment, I get the impression that we haven't progressed from the state of consensus or non-existence of consensus from the mailing list. I don't know how to proceed currently with that.
I'll write up a bit more for the mailing list. I meant to that for the meeting and didn't get a chance. So sorry. We like just kind of trying to make what we talked about today, clearer, because it's easy when you see it written down. Have time to think about it. Maybe that will help.
Mike?
No, I don't see that we've progressed.
So I hesitate to offer a number 4, both because it's a number 4 and because I may be deadly wrong. This is Rick Cygnus. It sounds like a part of the problem here is the conflation of identity and reply mechanism. And right now we have a single value attendee who is, we conventionally always use their mail to. I wonder if a simpler answer is to always have that, with the assumption that if you only have that, that is your single reply mechanism. You can always reply with IMIP to the attendee, as you said, like their email address. So instead of saying, add an email property, which is their address book email, and the organizer's address is the reply to, we say the field that is there now, which is doing 2 jobs, that's the default reply to for IMIP. And if you wish, you can supply alternate reply mechanisms. This is the current reply to, which is, these are alternates. And then to get rid of this heuristic, I would suggest replacing the use of an object with an array, and you can put them in the recipient's preferred order or the server's preferred order in multi-part alternative style. So you could say, look, if there's nothing here, IMIP will work. You have my mail to, and if I didn't use a mail to as my identifier URI, what am I doing? And if we have other mechanisms that we would like transport to upgrade to, we can supply those as alternative preferential methods. So this is an idea shot from the hip, but I haven't been able to see why it's a terrible one yet.
So the main difference there is it's an array rather than object.
Sorry, Neil?
Is the main difference just that it's an array, or is there another difference I'm missing there? You're saying
the other difference is that, unless I misremember JS Calendar, that we're pulling out the need for reply to fall back to a single identifier that is on that's on the data.
But for this, I would understand that. So we can't do that with ITIP as it is right now. So we would need. I mean, we will. I wouldn't know how.
There's not always a mail to URI.
Yeah. So the concern currently at the moment is what do we need to provide to make it interoperate with the current ITIP over with iCalendar method, and of course we can build something on top, but we need to extend ITIP. But if I understood correctly, what you were saying, like there are a couple of scheduling addresses, and then there is one where you say this is the preferred, and this is what the preferred one also should go into the ITIP, right?
No, I don't. Well, we can follow this up on a list where I can write it down and be very clear. But my suggestion is we have a canonical identifier. That's what we're currently using, the single URI for the user, which is now the identifier for the user and can be used for ITIP if nothing, for sending IMIP, right? If it's mail to and nothing else is present. But to offer an upgrade path to richer forms of reply than IMIP allows, there can be a list of alternative paths. I'll write something up, but I think I've caused confusion.
Yeah.
I think I get the idea. So
just as a point here, we have 10 minutes left in the session. We have 6 more slides on this plus tasks. So let's not spend too much longer on this.
Okay.
I should probably take the list, but Ken.
Yeah, so real quick, I originally stood up to basically thumbs up what Ron and Mike had said earlier and partially what Rick just said. So I think there's 3 points we need to look at. We need to preserve the identifier in the attendee or the organizer, which may or may not be a mail to URI. If it's a URN or something else, we need to preserve the mail property, mail parameter, because that's the address we actually need to use for ITIP.
I'm with Mike on this. There's no distinction between ITIP and IMIP. They're both the same thing. That's the address currently being used. And as Bron said, I think we should allow this to be extensible. But as Mike said, let's not try to jam something in there now because we don't know what might be coming down the road, and whatever we come up with now might be insufficient. I think that's a fairly straightforward way forward. Whether we make it an object or an array, agnostic on that. I don't really care either way.
Yep, I agree. Next slide, please. Okay, send by, I'll make this quick. So there is a send by property in JS Calendar defined to be the email address of the from header from the email that this calendaring data got received from. There is a send by parameter on an attendee in iCalendar, which is defined differently. I wonder if we should rename send by in JS Calendar to send from, because it doesn't use the same name for something different. And the question is also, do we need to preserve the send by parameter from iCalendar on a participant? I would say yes. Any quick opinions on that? Okay, I hear thumbs up. Perfect. Next one, please. Okay, so very quick. We propose to change the vendor extension naming schemes. Currently, it's defined to be a domain and the property name. While defining the standard mapping for JS Calendar, iCalendar, we realized we don't have a domain we are authorized to use. So we want to change the extension mechanism. On the next slide, there is the proposal. We propose to allow any HTTPS URI, which should point to the definition of the property. This any vendor can use for extension. We also allow URIs in the URN namespace if they use the IETF namespace. So basically, for every property, it will be self-documented in which RFC they were defined. Any? Sure. All right. That was quick. Thank you. Sorry, yours? Oh, okay. Last point, at last IETF, we were saying that unknown properties should be preserved so that unknown properties in JS Calendar should not lead to clients invalidate the JS Calendar data. That was mainly because we were saying, okay, maybe some implementations will not keep up with all the extensions. So currently they would reject legit JS Calendar data. It turns out that we specified neither in the existing JS Calendar RFC, so we are free to do whatever we want. There are two ways to deal with that. On the next slide is the first option. The first option would be to validate known properties, but to demand that all others should be ignored but stored. But this, in my opinion, can lead to name squatting. For example, if you have a vendor A using prop A, later on an RFC defines prop A, but with a different value type or semantics, there's going to be data with that property already out there, and we do not want it because it would clash. We already have quite a lenient way to add things to JS Calendar. We have expert review and not specification review. But I would propose even something more lenient so that vendors are encouraged to at least document their extensions. And this is on the next slide. I would like to propose that we do not support any unvendored properties at all after we have defined JS Calendar. Implicitly, all properties that do not have a prefix will be the properties of JS Calendar BIS. Everything else will be prefixed either by an HTTPS URI or by the URN of the RFC that the extension is defined in. This way, this is very similar to JMap capabilities in a way. It increases the payload because we have longer strings in a way. But using complex types, like I've shown with the examples on the right side, I think it would be worth it so that we do not have any issue with name clashes, and hopefully all the properties one sees are self-documented in the payload.
I don't think this deals with the issue of implementations getting out of step with the. I mean, they may not be unknown properties in the specification. They may just be unknown properties to that particular implementation.
Yeah.
So it'll be rejecting a perfectly valid object because it simply doesn't know about a property.
But we already we require implementations to preserve extension properties. We obviously require implementations to implement the JS calendar spec, and there can be nothing else in a JS calendar data, either an extension properties from future extensions, or the ones that are defined in the specification that the implementation is expected to implement. So in that, using this scheme, there can't be any unprefixed unknown property ever.
Yeah. So basically, the properties we define in this document are the only things that can't start with a URN or an HTTPS.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So I have questions around patching and path objects with all the slashes that are in these. It's going to be very easy for people to screw up the quoting. I'm not a fan of all those slashes I'm seeing in these examples here, given that that's a special character in our patch syntax.
I mean, we won't get rid of all the slashes. I can see the point you're raising. I was thinking of if we should say that if it's not a URN, the HTTPS scheme is implicit. So we would be back again at domain name, but with the path. With that.
Yeah, I mean, it's not hard to do if you're using, not trying to do it by hand. But if you are, then yes, you could screw that up. That's what it means.
So maybe we can separate HTTPS domains from which of the two options, or other said, is option 2 something that people tend to agree with other than me? Are there any, would you see any reason not to do the second option? Which is saying that only the only non-vendor extended properties in a JS calendar are the ones in the RFC that is JS calendar biz, and everything else is added as an extension property with the proper RFC number where the property is defined.
I don't particularly like option 2 because over time we're going to wind up with lots of URN RFC number stuff everywhere. It does really bloat it and make it hard for people to deal with in future, I think.
This is Ken. My suggestion was going to be if there are vendor specific properties, why can't they define their own URN space just like the IETF has? And then we
can do that.
We get rid of the slashes that way.
I just thought like it might not make sense to have an ISBN URN as a property, but maybe it does. I don't know. But taking Bron's point into account, for option 1, there is the unresolved question of how to deal with name squatting of non-vendor extended properties. Given the time, I don't think we will be able to resolve that.
I'd just say that you can't create non-vendor properties unless you specify an RFC. Done.
The issue here is what would we expect implementations to do if they don't know about this property, but it's actually a legit property? Should they reject it or not? They don't know any better.
No, they should do exactly as they would if it had a URN RFC number on the front. It's, as far as they're concerned.
Yeah, ignore it.
Just a string they don't know.
So it will mean that clients or services can store data with standard named properties that are not standard, and in the future a same standard property will come up and it will have a different semantic or value type.
That's going to happen whatever you do, I reckon.
So I don't know, it was said that it's not going to happen, or?
Yeah, I can't see how that's different either way. You can obviously.
It could happen. It could happen now, and it's not it's not that much of a problem. But I think you can avoid it happening when people are trying to do stuff legitimately by making a very easy registration process or a pre-registration process for names.
I mean, we already have expert review. I don't think we can make it more easy than that. Okay.
That might be enough.
All right. So then that's it for today. And I think it's time.
All right, Mike, go for it.
All right, next slide, please. This came up as part of discussions we were having about other possibilities for the tasks specification, and somebody pointed this out, and I hadn't even noticed this. So it says in RFC 5545, the V2Do, it explicitly disallows a duration on its own. So I hadn't noticed this bit of text. If we go to the next slide. Okay, just saying the same thing again. You've got to have a DT start according to 5545. Now, 2445 didn't say that. It didn't have that restriction. So that restriction got slipped in when Bernard rewrote 2445 and produced 5545. Can we move on to the next slide? I'll see if I can move along here and get this done in. Okay, so 2445 allows duration by itself. And why does it matter? It matters in things like, one of the things our aims with the tasks update was to try and make them more compatible with things like project management. And when you string tasks together using temporal relationships, it's quite probable that the subsequent tasks in the chain will not have a start because they depend on previous tasks in the chain. You may know how long you're going to allow for the task, but you don't necessarily know exactly when it's going to start. So having a duration on its own is perfectly reasonable there. In fact, I think duration is perfectly reasonable on a standalone task. If you don't have a start on a task or on an end, it just floats along, and it's supposed to appear there in your UI every day until you do something about it. Having a duration on it, just as I say, I think this thing's going to take an hour, and it can just carry on floating along like that. I believe that was probably the intent of 2445, was you want to know how long this thing's going to take, but you don't necessarily know when you're going to do it. So next slide, please. My suggestion is we simply drop the constraint because there's no real indication of why it was added. I did have a call with Bernard and ask, and he couldn't remember. And I don't think there was any discussion online. It just appeared there. And then I had a look at iCal for J. I think Ken, is that Ken wandering up there? Looks at libical. iCal for J doesn't apply the constraint. Most of these libraries, I suspect, were written around 2445 times and up, and they weren't changed for this thing. So I'm not sure it's going to cause any problem. Ken?
Yeah, so this is Ken. Yeah. So I agree with Mike's assessment. I also believe that this text crept into 5445 by mistake, and duration should be allowed by itself. Which brings up the question of what do libraries currently do? Would they choke if it saw duration while the DT start? I did check libical, which I'm a maintainer of. It does not enforce DT start with duration, presumably because it was based on 2445 and has been very minimally updated as required with 5445. That being said, I'm not sure if we can rewrite this and just drop it wholesale. We may have to talk to our AD to see.
I think that's the next. Move to the next slide. Yeah, there we go. I don't know what we do about it. Is it an errata or is it an update? Yes,
exactly. Which is why I think we probably need to talk to our AD, and I already have something with Vcard I need to talk to him about tomorrow night. So I'll bring this up with him and see what his opinions are.
I mean, clearly something was in somebody's mind when they added this. It's probably Bernard's mind, and he added it. I don't know why, and I don't think he does now. So I think that was my last slide. I think that covered.
Just to add one more point. So yes, it was added in a intermediate draft, and it is not mentioned as one of the changes in the appendix of 5445. So
Oh yes, you went through them. Didn't you?
I could find no traffic on the mailing list with discussion. So my gut feeling is this was some kind of copy and paste mistake that wasn't even noticed in review, neither by the author or by the working group.
So this is yours. I just want to state that it might also be relevant for mapping between iCalendar and JS Calendar, because JS Calendar does not enforce. You can also have a duration on its own there.
Yeah, that's where it came up, and there was a lot of talking at cross purposes because I hadn't realized that the constraint was there in 5545.
All right, we're also already over time. Is there anything else people want to do before we let this go? I mean, I guess this just has to go to the area director, but we're all keen to lose the restriction if we can.
Good. Yes.
Our area director is officially Francesca for this working group, but obviously she's on leave at the moment, so I guess we talk to Murray. For now, Ken, you were going to talk to him, were you? Cool, perfect. All right, thanks everybody. We're done. Enjoy the rest of your day, /week.
Thank you.
I'll have a look at them anyway afterwards.
But I think if you're wondering whether it's an write down or an update,
Yeah,
should be an update.
ideally.